Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for our service to mark Holocaust Memorial Day. My name is Michael Newman. I'm the Chief Executive of the AJR, and as ever, it's a great pleasure to extend a warm and special welcome to you, our members, and your families. From our relationships with representatives from the countries with which the AJR shares interests, culture and history, I'm honoured to welcome His Excellency Bernhard Rabitz, Ambassador of the Republic of Austria, His Excellency Robert Ondrzejczak, Ambassador of the Slovak Republic, as well as other colleagues from the Austrian, Czech, German, Polish, Romanian and Ukrainian embassies. I'm also very happy to welcome Dita Shandrova from the Federation of Jewish Communities in the Czech Republic. And closer to home, I'm delighted to welcome Tulip Sadiq, MP for Hampstead and Kilburn, and Sally Seeley from the Department of Levelling Up and Communities, and the Chief of Staff of Lord Pickles, the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues. It is also always a great pleasure to welcome colleagues and friends representing organisations the AJR supports, partners and works closely with, both in the delivery of our social welfare support and in the field of Holocaust education and commemoration. And as well as our audience here, we're joined online by friends watching from Belsize Live. Welcome to you all. Friends, we gather to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day for the first time since the barbaric attacks in Israel last October. The unprecedented wave of terror was chilling in its perpetration, and it resonates deeply with us and our community for its intent, the killing of Jews for being Jews. It was the largest loss of life, of Jewish life, since the Shoah, and the parallels with the inhumanity of the Nazis is evident. We take this opportunity to remember those more than 1,200 people, young and old, who were brutally murdered in their homes, in some cases in their beds, in their communities on kibbutzim, and at a music festival that had the theme of peace. More than 250 were taken hostage, including Holocaust survivors, and while some of the abducted have been delivered home, we know that others have been killed. More than 100 days since 7th of October, we pray and hope to hear positive news about the safe return of more than 100 remaining hostages. Alongside the anguish we are feeling about friends, family and colleagues in Israel, we are now also threatened by the wave of unbridled anti-Semitism unleashed by the Hamas attacks and Israel's response. Hatred of Jews is shockingly now no longer curtailed within expressions of concern about Israel's actions. Now, not only is anti-Semitism verbalised without shame, but anti-Semites are attempting to intimidate us in plain sight. The attacks have also revealed a further manifestation of Holocaust distortion by linking the actions of Israel to those of the Nazis. Offensive comparisons within chants and slogans and the labelling as a pariah state, alongside the weaponisation of the definition of genocide, aims to further delegitimise the only Jewish country. It also overlooks the published charter of Hamas that calls for the annihilation of Jews and Israel. Last month, we marked the 75th anniversary of the United Nations ratification of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Both the Convention and this latest conflict served as a stark reminder that freedom is fragile and compels us to protect all impacted by war. The attacks on 7th of October have also impacted our collective efforts to remember and to study the Holocaust. Against the backdrop of rising anti-Semitism, there have been some withdrawals of participation in Holocaust education lessons and a dip in attendances at some museums. And yet, the proliferation of events marking Holocaust Memorial Day emboldens and fortifies us to further and accelerate our work, as does the widening range of types and places of commemorations, from verbatim theatre to local councils. All this ensures that the messages of remembrance and tolerance as well as the warnings from history, are reaching new audiences. Our efforts are also strengthened by new research, resources and publications, such as the Charter for Safeguarding Sites that will be launched tomorrow by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, at the European Commission. Sites are the key to remembrance, as we will hear today. They're important for research and education. They hold the historical record of the Holocaust, as is evidenced by our own UK Holocaust map, where visitors can learn about Britain's responses to Nazism. Above all, by safeguarding sites, we preserve the record and help protect the facts and truth of the Holocaust for generations to come. We here at the AJR also combat Holocaust distortion and anti-Semitism through our role as the largest benefactor of programmes and projects in Holocaust education and commemoration. And alongside the individual sponsorships that we award, we are delighted that this year, in partnership with the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation, the AJR will launch the UK Holocaust Testimony Portal, a comprehensive digital platform hosting Holocaust testimonies that will engage researchers, family members, educators and the general public. And as a convener of organisations that lead the way in delivering Holocaust education, we've been part of roundtable discussions and meetings to share ideas with colleagues how we as a sector can respond to the new reality post 7th of October. There are ways too for individuals to play a role. This year, to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, the Arleston Archives is launching a campaign, Every Name Counts. The aim is for volunteers to help digitise 30,000 documents about Holocaust survivors in the space of 1 week. Today's event is about remembering individuals, and our everlasting mission is to honour those who were murdered. To begin our service, which you can follow in the booklets on your chairs, I would now like to hand over to Rabbi Gabriel Botnick and Cantor Dr. Paul Heller from Belsize Square Synagogue to lead our service, and for Rabbi Botnick to give some introductory remarks. As ever, we begin our service with our candle lighting ceremony, and I'd like to invite our members to come forward to light a candle, please. Albert Lester, Lady Milena Grenfell-Baines, Lady Linda Reich, Lazar Roman, Gabby Foti and Peter Holgarten. And if I could ask all the candle lighters to stay at the end of having lit their candle, we'll take a photograph together. At the request of Holocaust Memorial Day, we also encourage everybody to light a candle and put it in your window this coming Saturday at the conclusion of Shabbat in remembrance. Thank you.
For a while now, the idea of marking Holocaust Memorial Day has seemed rather futile to me. We, the Jewish people, have our own day to remember the atrocities of the Shoah, Yom HaShoah. So this day is not intended for us. It is meant to remind others how ignorance, hatred, discrimination, and of course anti-Semitism can lead to unspeakable horrors that no soul should ever have to experience. But if we have learned anything from the past 107 days, it's that the world doesn't seem to care to learn this lesson, and that we, the Jewish people, often are led to feel that we cannot rely on others to protect us, but that if we were to do so, we can only do so with great caution. Because we've learned that if it's not for the Nazis trying to destroy us, then it's the jihadists. And if not the jihadists, the Cossacks. If not the Cossacks, the Crusaders. If not the Crusaders, it's the Romans. If not the Romans, the Greeks. If not the Greeks, then the Babylonians. If not the Babylonians, then the Amalekites. And if not the Amalekites, then the Egyptians. During the more than 3,000 years of our existence, countless nations have tried to rid the world of the Jews. And though each may have fallen short of their ultimate goal, and yet we still remain standing. The collective body of our people continues to bear the grotesque scars resulting from the traumas repeatedly inflicted upon us over the generations. So why bother observing Holocaust Memorial Day if we still find ourselves suffering at the hands of others? Why go through this annual charade if it hardly makes a difference? As nice as it is to have shows of support from world leaders, what difference does it make if their people are still perpetrating attacks against our synagogues, homes, and businesses, or attacking us in the street and online? Why pretend like any of this will make a difference whatsoever? Because giving up hope is not something we do. In this moment of compounded pain, I find myself guided by two teachings from our tradition, one modern and one ancient. It was Theodor Herzl who said, Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. And in Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Tarfon said, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor. It is not incumbent upon you to complete the task. V'lo ata ben chorin lehivatel mimena. But neither are you free to desist from trying. The dream of our people is perfectly clear. We wish to live freely without antagony or molestation, however and wherever we so desire, whether as religious or secular Jews, in Israel or in the diaspora. This is not an unreasonable desire, and yet the path towards its realization continues to elude us. So we continue to seek out the trailhead that just might lead us to our desired destination, turning to others for guidance and assistance along the way, inviting them to join us on our journey towards peaceful coexistence. And that is precisely what we are gathered today to do, and why we continue to mark Holocaust Memorial Day year after year. As we look upon the 6 candles representing the 6 million Jews whose souls were taken from us during the Shoah, and we acknowledge and honor those who came up to light these candles on behalf of the community, those of us who can, invite you to rise as Cantor Haller will lead us in El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer.
El Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Amtzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kamfei Ashechina B'ma'alot Kedoshim Uteorim Kezohar Harakia Mazirim Et Kahal Nishmot Sheshet HaMilyonim Acheinu Ve'achyoteinu Bnei Yisrael Anashim Nashim Vatav Shenergu Veshenishchatu Shenishrefu Venishsefu al Kiddush Hashem Bidei המרצחים הגרמנים, הנאצים ועוזריכם משאר העמים. בעל הרחמים הסתירם וסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיכם. אדוני הוא נחלתם. וגן עדן תהא מנוחתם. וינוחו בשלום על משכבם איפה הם, ונאמר אמן.
God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the echelons of the holy and pure, who shine like the radiant sky, to the 6 million souls of our Jewish brethren, men, women, and children who were killed, slaughtered, burned, and exterminated by the murderous Nazi regime and their enablers. May the memories of these innocent victims be a sanctification of God's name. O compassionate one, we ask that you hold these souls in your sheltering embrace for all eternity, and that they be bound up in the bond of life. Adonai is their portion. May their eternal home be true paradise, and may they finally rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated. We'll continue with Kenner Heller singing for us Shema Kolenu, asking our Creator to hear our voices and to answer our prayers of peace.
Shema Kolenu, Adonai Eloheinu, Chus Berachem Aleinu, Vekabel Merachamim Uberatzon et Tefilateinu, Hashivenu Adonai Eilecha Benashuva, Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Botnick, Cantor Heller, and our candlelighters. I'm now delighted to introduce our first speaker. As well as being an accomplished speaker in schools about her experiences, Lady Milena Grenfell-Baines has also become a film star in recent weeks, with her life and story being portrayed in the film One Life, depicting her escape from Prague, aged 8, on what transpired to be the last Kindertransport organised by Sir Nicholas Winton in July 1939. Milena, we're so very grateful for you coming all the way from Preston to be with us today. Milena.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Figurative freedom is the word this year, but my word, one day, is really the part of my story, the one day which we talked about last year. Back in 1936, I was 7 years old and living in a small town, and my father was the local councillor. At the time, the great writer Thomas Mann had been expelled from Germany. He was living in Switzerland, and he had no passport, as famous as he was. My father, being a great admirer of his writing, suggested to the town council that they made him a Czech citizen, gave him a Czech passport. It wasn't so simple. They had to have the permission from President Beneš. And Beneš sent my father to Switzerland to offer Thomas Mann and his family Czech passports. Fast forward to 1939. We are now living in Prague. On the evening of the 13th of March, the day before the rest of the country was occupied, my father received a message. He was to leave immediately because his name was on the list to be arrested by the Gestapo, and he was to go to Berlin, where nobody would look for him, and from there to try and get to England. He did exactly that. He left, and on the train to Berlin, in the carriage, he met a lady, an Indian lady, who was married to a German, telling her the story and saying he didn't know what to do when he gets to Berlin. And she said, "I'll hide you. Come and stay with me, and tomorrow my son will come and help you to get on your way to Brussels." The next morning, a German officer turns up, her son, but the lady had told him all the story. He was a great admirer of Thomas Mann, said to my father, "I'll take you with me." He went with the train as far as Frankfurt, left him there, told the guard to look after him. My father got to Brussels. By now, the country was being occupied. Czech money was not worth anything. And when he was pleading at the airport whether they would buy, whether he could fly to England, a total stranger standing behind him said, "What's the problem?" And when my father explained, the man said, "My son was born yesterday. To celebrate it, here's the money. Go to England." The first thing my father did at the end of the war was find the man in Brussels, Henry Bugenhout, to thank him. 20 years later, he'd become a radio amateur. In those days, you could talk to people with radios all over the world. And he had a message to come to Frankfurt to a meeting. And he did. And when he came into the room, his friend said, "Rudolf, you see this man standing over there? His name is Joachim Schreiber. He is the soldier who helped you 20 years ago to escape." So the 2 one-days became a great event in our lives. Back to 1939. My father is now in England. In May, my mother tells me and my sister, I'm now 9 and my sister 3.5, that we're going to England. The way we got on this Winton train, and some of you may already seen One Life today, has always remained a mystery. Our parents eventually never talked about it. We never knew how my sister and I managed to get on that train. But on the night of the 31st of July, the railway station, my mother and my grandfather accompanied us, and my grandfather gave me an autograph book, a book I still have today. And in the book he wrote, "Remember to be a faithful daughter of the country you're leaving, to your parents and to your grandparents who love you very much. Prague, the 31st of July, 9 o'clock in the evening," and we were put on the train. It's such a long time ago. I know it happened. I can't actually, remember sitting in the train. But I know that we traveled as far as Holland. And during the war, I happened to be at school with a number of Czech refugees, with one girl who told me that she and I had actually traveled in the same compartment. And she said, as we were leaving Prague, we held hands and we said, "Nebudeme brečet." We're not going to cry. And so we got to Holland, met by kind Dutch people, given, I believe, chocolate to drink, and put on a big ship. We'd never seen the sea. But we have one memory, which many of us talked about and has been written about, and you may have come across people's versions how they came to England. We were given tea with milk. Sounds perfectly normal to you. We had never been given tea with milk. We didn't like tea with milk. And we remember food, so we poured the tea out. We were given white bread sandwiches. We didn't like white bread sandwiches. We wanted our rye bread. So these are childhood memories of coming to England. However, we were met at Liverpool Street Station, my sister and I, by a very kind man called Roland Ratcliffe. He lived in Ashton-under-Lyne, up in Lancashire, not far from Manchester. And with him we travelled to Ashton. We got to know him as Daddy and Mummy Ratcliffe. He was a local councillor, and he was also the secretary of the Labour Party. The Radcliffes lived in a terrace house, 2 bedrooms, a front room, a kitchen with a bath, and a lavatory in the yard. We had come from a very modern apartment in Prague, but as far as I know, it didn't worry us. But they had a daughter who was 16, and so that they could keep us together, they sent their daughter to live with a grandmother, so we could live with them. Miraculously, in February 1940, our mother appeared. My mother escaped. It's another story, there isn't time, but she came through Norway, got permit in 1940 in February to fly to England, and so we were together again as a family. We were able to live together in a little house, and the rent for this, the money, there was the Czech government in exile, the Czech trust fund had the money, and I believe we received as much as £2, 10 shillings a week to live on. And the rent for the house was 15 shillings a week. I was sent to a local school, Mosley Road Council School, where I think I must have learnt English very quickly. But I have 3 memories, and one of them is from the school. We were all given knitting needles to knit squares or blankets, which was stitched together for blankets for the army. And you continental ladies, you know how we knit. We knit differently. We hold the wool in our left hand, and we put anybody who knits like the continentals do, it's different. I was knitting, and the class went very quiet. And the teacher came and said, "What are you doing?" "Knitting." "Oh, no, you have to learn to knit in English." So that is my memory of Ashton-under-Lyne School. And I have in my autograph book the headmistress, the art teacher, the school mistress that I went to school with. In 1942, the Czech government decided to open a school for Czech refugees. And the school was in a place called Hinton Hall near Whitchurch. And when I talk to children and I say, I was sent to a boarding school, they say, "Oh, boarding school?" I said, "Yes." It was a decrepit old manor house that was literally unfit to live in, if you like. Partly it had been used by the Czech army, who had been living in Cholmondeley Park, not far away. But very often there was no hot water, no electricity. But there were about 100 of us. We were very happy, like a family. And we were taught entirely in Czech. My mother refused to let my little sister go. She had had her heart broken, as she said, putting us on the train prior to that. So she went to a local school in Ashton. But I spent my war years in the Czechoslovak grammar school. And looking at that autograph book only today, there's a page in there with the signature of 6 airmen. The airmen, they were all young boys who'd come with the Czech Army and the Czech Air Force, and they had come to the school to matriculate. And many of you might know what happened to these guys, those who survived, who went back to the Czech Republic, and what the communists did to them, and how many of them, having been in the West, were imprisoned and some killed, and imprisoned simply by the communist regime, simply because they had been in the West. But I had the names of these 6 men in my autograph book. I spent the years in the school, and really, how much time have I got? The rest of my life is not so interesting. It's really the fact that I was able to travel on the Winton train with my sister. Now, for 40 years, we had no idea how we came to England. And most of you now know the story of Esther Ranson and That's Life. And how I found out, I was in the kitchen, 2 children, phone goes, and the woman says, "This is Esther Ranson." And my reply was, "And I'm the Queen of England," because I really thought a friend was joking. And Esther Ranson said, "What was your name before you were married?" I said, "Milena Fleischmann." She said, "That's right." She said, "I have your name on a list." We have a scrapbook. I have a scrapbook in my hand that belonged to a man called Nicholas Winton. And in that scrapbook, there is a list of 669 names. And we've chosen a few of them to come to the studio. We want to surprise Nicholas Winton, introduce him to some of your children. Now, Winton's daughter, Barbara, has written a book about him, which has now been used partly as the film One Life. And in it she writes that when her father, who didn't know what to do with the scrapbook, finally, it got into the hands of Elizabeth Maxwell, the wife of Maxwell, the publisher. Nobody was really interested in it at the time. And Elizabeth Maxwell said, "Oh, we can't lose this, you can't throw this out," because he was literally trying to get rid of all the old documents. And she wrote to every address in that scrapbook and received 200 answers back from the people who had actually looked after some of the children. And then this is how Esther Ranson got hold of the book, through Elizabeth Maxwell. And Ranson said to us, "When you come in, you're not to say a word. Sit there, we're going to bring Mr. Winton in and surprise him." And in the book, Barbara writes that when her parents were invited to the studio, she said, "My mother, thinking it would be quite boring, decided to stay at home. She'll watch it from television." She said, "My parents had no idea, from being an obscure man living in Maidenhead to something that will throw him out into the world." And when Nicky, as we got to call him, walked down the aisle and sat down, well, you can still find that program, That's Life, on YouTube. And she walks off the stage, and nobody's seen this. It was filmed, but she stopped that little bit from being filmed. She walked off the stage, went to him, put her arms around him, borrowed his hanky, and went back on her stage. And she said that in all her life, in all the programs she'd ever did, this is the moment, the greatest moment that she'd ever experienced in a television program. And he still looked very bewildered. He was in fact quite cross because he hadn't been warned about it. And we had very little time afterwards to get to know him because he was so upset. He left very quickly. But on his left was another school friend called Vera Gissing. And Vera Gissing, who'd been trying for years to find out how she'd got on the train, had only been living half an hour away from him in the sort of next village. And so from the second program, when Esther Ranson invited relations, other people, when she says, "Will you please stand up?" And, most of the studio stands up. Nicky turns around and suddenly sees what he had done, because prior to that, he said, "I've been there, done that, I've done my job, I'll get on with the next thing." He drove an ambulance in Dunkirk. He became an air instructor. He was a banker. And in Barbara's book, you will read that he suddenly got very fed up of people who wanted to take money, make money, and started basically working for charities. And when the message got to him, could he come to Prague in 1938, 1938, when all the refugees that had been thrown out of the Sudetenland, 200,000 landed in Prague, tried to get out, and tried to get the children out, that's when young Nicholas Winton, who was 29 years old, came to Prague to try to rescue the children. I've just been told that's it. So I suggest go and see the film, and next time perhaps you'll get the rest of the story. Thank you.
As ever, I've been put in my place. Thank you very much for Milena. I guess we'll all have to reconvene and hear the next part of the story another time. I can assure you, though, that there is a cup of tea with some milk waiting for you at the end of it. It's now my great pleasure to invite Amos Schonfeld to address us. In his professional life, Amos is the Deputy Director of Hayas JCOR, following the merger of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and the Jewish Council for Racial Equality, but he's also the grandson of Rabbi Solomon Schonfeld, credited with saving thousands of lives from the Holocaust. Amos.
Esteemed guests, thank you. It's the obligation of every person born in a safer room to open the door when someone in danger knocks. These words were written in 2017 by Dina Nayeri, an Iranian refugee, 33 years after the death of my grandfather, Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld of blessed memory. These words give a small insight into the man who, starting at just the age of 26, was able to save the lives of thousands of Jewish refugees before, during, and after the Holocaust. Through the Chief Rabbi's Religious Emergency Council, which was, in fact, just Solomon Schonfeld operating from an office, using the authority of his soon-to-be father-in-law, the Chief Rabbi Hertz, he reports rescuing 1,300 people, many of them apparently rabbis, communal workers, and their families before the outbreak of the war, along with 200 yeshiva students and over 300 children from Vienna. All told, we understand that Dr. Schonfeld, as he was most often known, was believed to have saved over 3,000 people, including 700 as part of the Kindertransport. In the course of my life and work in the community, I meet many who are alive today because of his heroism. In fact, these conversations are often the best data that we have to go on, because that 3,000 figure is probably a best guess. When he was asked during his brother Akiva's Shiva in 1981 how many people he had saved, he pointedly turned the question around and said, "How many didn't I save?" When I look back at his remarkable achievements, the question I always come to is what enabled him to become one of the most prolific individual Holocaust rescuers involved in the Kindertransport. Now, much has been written about my grandfather's charisma and tenacity, his prodigious fundraising and uncompromising manner. However, there are some stories, ones that perhaps might be less well known, that I'll share with you that I hope will show you the virtues of the man. When his father, Victor Schonfeld, died at just 49 years old in 1930, there was a question of what would become of the AJR HMD Synagogue he led, not to mention the Union of Orthodox Hebrew Congregations, a secondary school, and the Kashrut Authority that would later become known as Kadassia. His second son, Solomon, was just 18 years old and already articled to a West End firm to become a lawyer, and he was appointed his successor. He studied simultaneously for smicha, for his rabbinic ordination, and for a doctorate, and returned as the Rav, Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schonfeld, in 1933, aged just 21. I know. It was only some 5 years later that his commitment to supporting Jewish refugees solidified into the Chief Rabbi's Religious Emergency Council. When rescuing and resettling the Jews of Europe was first floated before the war, many in our community opposed it. It was felt that swathes of new arrivals would disrupt an already delicate status quo, that it may cause an increase in anti-Semitism, and that others should just take them in first. Dr. Schonfeld had the foresight to see the situation in Europe for what it was, the building blocks of genocide. He understood the fragility of freedom. He offered up his own home, that of his widowed mother, and offered them to incoming refugees in order to build confidence within the community. The knowledge that this leader had given up his own bed and slept in an armchair showed the gravity of the situation. Indeed, when his brother returned from Oxford in 1938 to find the house full of refugees and someone in his bed, he allegedly said to the boy who was in it that the least he could do was to get out and sleep underneath. "I can't do that, there's already someone in there," was the response. As a young man, in fact, a very young man, he was able to convince Home Office officials to offer visas for these refugees. On one level, it was down to his being charismatically handsome, with film star looks, which I'm sure you can see went down the generations perfectly, and being both charming and persuasive. It was down to his relentless and stubborn spirit. So when the Home Office put pressure on my grandfather to ensure that aside from children, only so-called religious workers were brought over from Europe, he convinced them that alongside rabbis and scribes, that tzitzit knotters were essential to the running of Jewish life. Now, of course, the tzitzit, the corner of the prayer shawl, those are really easy to tie if you know what you're doing. But whether we know if the Home Office officials were in on the act or not is a question for the historians. Now, at a similar time, when there was a crunch to get visas out, he instructed boys at the school that he led that they should stay late into Friday evening to complete the work of filling them out, even though it was Shabbat. It was needed to be done on the grounds of pikuach nefesh, of saving lives. One of the boys involved is reported to have said, "Dr. Schonfeld, this work is stressful. Can I have a smoke?" To which he said something like, "Don't be stupid, it's Shabbos, now carry on writing." When the forms were filled in and my grandfather drove to the Home Office to deliver them, he walked home because the mitzvah was done. This work continued right until the outbreak of the war, including a final trip to Germany that occurred after he had been warned by the Foreign Office that it had become known that the Nazi authorities were aware of his activities and intended to arrest him. During the war, my grandfather pursued various schemes that historians today believe could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives, including most substantially the 1942 bill to admit Jews to the British dominions. He also helped many Jews who had been considered enemy aliens in the UK and had been held in internment camps in the Isle of Man. He returned to Europe following the end of the war, visiting concentration camps and continuing to help people and communities rebuild their lives. He found some children in orphanages, in one of which he was shown a dormitory after dark. He is reported to have walked into the room and said, "Shema Yisrael," and to have waited until young voices completed the sentence, allowing him to identify several Jews among them. He also funded a fleet of 13 synagogue ambulances loaded with religious requisites and kosher food that were sent to Jewish centres and to concentration camps. So much of Schonfeld's work stemmed from the obligation he felt to ensure that Jewish children could be resettled in a way that recognised and allowed for the continuity of their cultural and religious lives. It has only been recognised recently that refugees who have lost everything benefit from being in a familiar environment, and otherwise they may find things destabilising when faced with a wholly new culture. That so many of these stories of rescuing people from death and destitution, and indeed the memory of Solomon Schonfeld himself, remain unknown to so many is down to his own insistence not to claim any special credit for his work when so many others made similar efforts and took similar risks and were unsuccessful. He once said, "If I were to blow my own trumpet, the Almighty wouldn't do what I wanted anymore." So today, I not only recall his work for the sake of it, for the sheer heroism and for the stories that it has brought to us down the generations, but also as an inspiration to my own journey. I'm the founder and CEO of Our Second Home, a youth movement supporting refugees and asylum seekers to flourish into adulthood in a place they call home. We've supported nearly 400 displaced young people from 36 different countries through residential trips, leadership training, youth clubs, and English lessons. I'm also, as was mentioned, the Deputy Director of HIAS JCOR, which is part of what used to be known as the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. During the Holocaust, HIAS helped 250,000 men, women, and children to escape Nazi persecution, and between 1945 and 1951 resettled 167,450 displaced Jewish refugees from war-torn Europe. The idea that my grandfather likely worked together with highest representatives in their efforts brings me huge nachas. In this work today, we retell these stories of the past when we meet with decision makers in government. They're a reminder that what we witnessed before should be a lesson to us today, and a warning that we cannot harden our hearts to those looking to the UK for sanctuary in times of need. Jewish communities continue to volunteer for and support projects like Our Second Home, like Highest J-Corps and many others, because we see the historical continuity linking our stories with the ones of today. Solomon Schonfield's legacy not only lives on in those who survived because of his heroism, the Hasmonean schools that he founded, or the old age home near where I live in Hackney that's named after him, his steadfast and chutzpah-filled commitment to the Mishnaic saying, "The one who saves a life, it is as if they have sustained an entire world," is a standard that, as the lived experience of the Holocaust may fade, is more important and more urgent for us to live by than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amos. Our last speaker today is Neil Martin, Chief Executive of the Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade. I mentioned earlier about safeguarding sites and the important role sites can play in preserving the record of the Holocaust. And I'm delighted that Neil has kindly agreed to share the story of one of those places, as well as a lesser-known act of rescue. Neil.
Esteemed survivors and refugees, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today humbled and deeply honoured to commemorate AJR's Holocaust Memorial Day with you. But why am I here, you might ask? Well, as the Chief Executive of JLGB, or the Jewish Lads and Girls Brigade, as many of you may know it, I have a story to tell. For almost 20 years now, as the lead professional of the JLGB, I've been privy to countless tales of our nearly 130-year history. However, one particular narrative has always stood out, and one that just 2 days ago, on January 20th, marked the 85th anniversary. But it was almost totally forgotten, and so I'm grateful for AJR for including me as a last-minute speaker. It's an almost unbelievable story about how JLGB, a youth organisation known for fun, adventure and summer camps, did something extraordinary and helped save the lives of the thousands of Jews from Nazi persecution. Whilst the world is of course aware of the incredible Kindertransport rescue, the story of the parallel Kitchener camp rescue has hardly been told, nor would JLGB's involvement ever truly been acknowledged. In January 1939, among the darkening shadow of Nazi persecution, a beacon of hope shone brightly on the Kentish coast of England, the Kitchener camp. The genesis of the Kitchener camp, named after Lord Kitchener, alongside the Kindertransport, was driven by the Central British Fund for German Jewry, the forerunner of War Jewish Relief. Their incredible vision and determination in the face of a humanitarian crisis were crucial in persuading the British government to permit these life-saving initiatives. The Jewish Lads Brigade, as it was called then, offered to manage the Kitchener camp, and the Home Office then granted the first 100 visas for men and women to begin preparing the camp. Transformed from a desolate First World War army base, the Kitchener camp would quickly become a sanctuary for nearly 4,000 Jewish men from Germany, Austria, Poland and Czechoslovakia. These men, many who had been suffered in concentration camps, found not just shelter, but a resemblance of normal life. The rebuilt Kitchener camp featured a hospital, a post office, had its own orchestra, a football team, and even a 1,000-seater cinema built with money donated by Odeon cinema tycoon Oscar Deutsch. Operating as a self-contained community, the Kitchener camp offered both respite and dignity to its residents. The JLGB took charge of its logistics. It also provided the key personnel to manage the day-to-day, including the two JLGB brothers, Jonas and Phineas May, who ran it. Jonas, the JLGB secretary, the very role I hold today, became the camp director, and Phineas was the welfare and entertainment officer. From the outset, the refugees themselves played a vital role in renovating and rebuilding the camp. Many of them had been through Jewish training schools such as Ort in Germany and were skilled in carpentry, plumbing, joinery and bricklaying. This was both necessity and a conscious choice, helping men to help themselves, as Ernest Joseph put it, the architect and then JLGB Chief Staff Officer who helped find and purchase the Kitchener site. During these crucial months, the Kitchener camp became more than a shelter. It was a springboard for a new life. Many of its residents joined the Auxiliary Military Pioneer Corps, contributing valiantly to the British war effort and solidifying the bond between refugees and their host nation. However, after the Nazi invasion and occupation of Holland, Belgium and France in May 1940, public opinion towards the camp soured. Government fears about Nazi spies meant that all male refugees that were not involved in the military or had not yet emigrated were now termed enemy aliens and were interned onto the Isle of Man. Sadly, after just 16 months, the thriving camp, which had been a haven to so many, was disbanded and closed. And perhaps this is why the story got lost in time, as it often so sadly confused with that of the internment camps. This wrong, however, was righted in April 2022 when the UK government posthumously honoured Jonas and Phineas May and Ernest Joseph with British Heroes of the Holocaust medals. These three JOGB heroes played pivotal roles in establishing and operating the Kitchener camp. Their extraordinary humanity and resilience provided refuge to thousands of Jewish men in one of history's darkest periods. Their medals, awarded to their descendants, are a powerful reminder of the significant impact individuals can make in times of crisis. Thanks to their tremendous efforts, it is estimated that the Kitchener camp is estimated by Yad Vashem that over 15,000 Jews who passed through the Kitchener camp were saved from Nazi persecution. This remarkable chapter in history is a testament to the enduring power of courage, compassion and community in the face of unimaginable adversity. This week, as we honour the 85th anniversary of the opening of the Kitchener camp, we also celebrate the collaboration between World Jewish Relief and JOGB that made it possible, a spirit that continues to guide JOGB to this day as we commit to empower the next generation of young people to be active, compassionate citizens. Thank you for allowing me to share this story with you today. Thank you to the survivors and refugees for the continued inspiration and for being a living testament to enduring strength of the human spirit. Thank you.
These are truly remarkable stories. And as I opened by questioning why we come together, and the answer being we come together because we know nothing but to hold on to hope. And these stories fill us with a sense of hope of what is possible if just a single person chooses to act. And imagine if everybody were to act and make a difference. So invite those who can to rise and join me and Kenner Heller in the Mourner's Kaddish, words that we say upon the death and the anniversary of death of loved ones, but nowhere in the words do we mention death. We speak about hope, we speak about peace, we speak in positivity. And so we try to hold on to this message, this fragility of freedom, and realize that we need to hold on to the promise, that possibility of positivity. Please join me on the back of our handouts. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv v'miru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam omei amaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei d'kusha b'richu, le'elad min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran v'ama v'miru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru amen. Oseh shalom b'romav, hu yaseh shalom alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'miru amen. May the one who makes peace in the heavens above make peace for us, for all of Israel, and for all of humanity. And let us say, Amen. Amen. You may be seated. Before Michael shares final closing remarks, Kenner Heller will lead us in Psalm 23 at the bottom of the handout. Speaking of times of desperation when it seems that there's no reason to hold on to hope, and yet we still continue to do so. We shall not fear that shadow of death, because we have our faith to guide us.
Mizmor David, Adonai rohi lo echzar, bin odeshe yar bitzeini, al mei menuchot yechaleni. Nafshi yeshobeb, yancheni b'malgei tzedek leman shemo. Gam ki helech begeit salmavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha, shiftecha umishantecha, hema yachamoni, taharoch lefanai, shulchan neget zorerai, nishanti beshemen roshi, kosi revaya. Achtov v'chesed irdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti bebeit Adonai v'shavti bebeit Adonai lehorech yamim.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That concludes our service for Holocaust Memorial Day. A special thank you to our candle lighters, to our speakers, Lady Milena, to Amos and to Neil, and of course to Rabbi Botnick and Cantor Heller and our friends at Belsize Square for making us so comfortable as always. A big thank you also to my colleagues for delivering the event today, especially to Susan Howard and all the members of our regional groups team. Can I please ask that the candle lighters and speakers come forward at the end of the remarks here so we can have some photographs with the candles and the AJR banner. And let me also take the opportunity to remind you to please be in touch if you or anyone you know who could benefit from our services, particularly our social welfare support. At this critical moment, we really do want to hear from as many first generation that could benefit and that we can help. And as a gentle reminder, it's never too late to join the AJR. Last year, we enrolled 22 first generation, including one lady aged 103. And I'm happy to say she's now 104. Please do now join us for some refreshments. Thank you very much.